Taylor, Lindsay, our Clark Scholar mentors, Joanna Zana, and Najat, which is not up, you are in the room, thank you, Najat. Along with our staff who always have a hand in something, Sandy and Maria, I'm sure they helped in some way that we don't see. It's not easy to organize an event like this at the very end of a long year, and we appreciate the time, energy, and spirit you put into today's event. I also want to thank the panelists for today's event. We're looking forward to learning more about your work, and a big thank you to Professor Taylor and Professor Rayford for stepping in after two of our panelists were captured by COVID. We wish them a quick recovery.
I don't know where Mela is, but yeah, Mela does not have, she should be here, I'm not sure.
Okay.
She just be here.
So let me begin with an acknowledgement that we come together today on the campus of UC Berkeley, sited on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone, or the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Inspired by the leadership of the Black Studies Collaboratory, the department is committed to making our acknowledgement concrete. And this week, we may have already made our first payment of Shumi land tax. Through the Indigenous Women-led Soberete Land Trust, which is an urban land trust founded in 2012 with the goals of returning traditionally Chochenyo and Karkan lands in the San Francisco Bay Area to indigenous stewardship and cultivating more active reciprocal relationships with the land. Giving Shumi is a material way for non-indigenous people living in the East Bay to participate in the rematriation of land to indigenous people. And you can learn more for folks who are interested at Sogoreate, SOGOREATE-landtrust.org. So earlier this year, Lindsay shared a file that included a number of memos and letters written by Professor Bebe Clark related to the Drake Symposium. The file was entitled Doin' the Drake. In that document, Professor Clark shares the origins of the Drake Symposium. As she writes, the symposium is named in honor of St. Clair Drake, who during the 1970s would come to Berkeley once a month to meet with graduate students and discuss a particular text. In his memory, she continues, we would like to reconstitute that tradition each spring semester. So here we are. Bebe Clark also writes about the intention of the forum. It will allow us to create a community of scholars across the disciplines as we attempt to change the climate of isolation that is so typical of graduate study at Berkeley. Year after year, the symposium has attempted to do just that, to challenge isolation and build community. The symposium began with presentations from graduate students and faculty and expanded over the years to include undergraduate students like our Clark scholars and the other undergrads who are joining us today. I should note that the 1994 forum included an invited lecture from none other than our elder in residence, Daphne Booz. That's really cool to see. Now, decades later, keeping the tradition alive has been more challenging in some years than in others, and this year is among the challenging years. But each time we convene the Drake, we honor the spirit that moved St. Clair Drake to travel to Berkeley and meet with students. We honor the spirit of Bebe Clark, who the receipts show, and she was like meticulous in the planning, was deeply committed to continuing the annual symposium. And we honor one another by sitting and listening and sharing and commenting on our scholarly work, which is a big part of who we are as people and why we are not just here at Berkeley, but here in this department. So with that said, let me say welcome once more, and let's get on with it. Thank you. Okay, so where would the panelists like to sit?
They can sit right there, and here's Mela.
Okay, so should I move?
Mela can sit right here.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Good morning.
We are a small but mighty group, and the Drake is an annual symposium where we want to keep it going every RRR week. This year we've had, in addition to this event, we had the 25th anniversary, which took a lot of energy and effort, but we want to maintain this annually. And so I'm so excited to introduce our first panel, Black activist elders, in terms of our undergraduate students engaging activist elders of the Bay Area. This project is sponsored by the Abolition Democracy Initiative, ADI, And I'm so excited to kind of share how it all began. So fall semester, I sent out an email with a flyer indicating that I was interested in identifying folks who wanted to work on this project as interns, so to speak, and to engage with activist elders and to record their experiences. And so I'm not sure if you guys know, but we received a lot of applications. And after going through the applications, we identified 5 undergraduate students, 4 of whom will present today. 1 has COVID, so she will not be presenting today. Alicia has COVID. And so, but these 5 young scholars, along with Corey Rose, who is a graduate student in the School of Journalism, beginning January, we began to meet 1 day a week, Thursday evening, in our staff lounge, learning the technology in terms of how to actually interview and how to interview via, I guess, journalistic technology, if that's the best way of describing it. And Corey, in the end, will engineer the interviews that will all be deposited in the Ethnic Studies Library here on campus. And so with that said, I'm going to turn it over to 3 of our current undergraduates who have interviewed, who are interviewing, who are preparing for the process, to talk about how they have prepared, their expectations in terms of the process. And one of our scholars conducted their interview yesterday. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mela.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. I think I'll just pull up a few notes to make sure I've got everything correct. But yeah, thank you all so much for having us today. This is a really exciting project and experience. And so I think Professor Taylor already kind of laid out some of the groundwork leading up to kind of how we started this research and this project. And I think I can speak maybe a little bit for all of us as students that we all came into the project really passionate about activism and history, and specifically a lot of, you know, the Black elders that have engaged in this type of activism, oftentimes here in the Bay Area, but also nationally and globally. And you know, many of their involvements, whether that's within the Black Panther Party or their fights for equal treatment and resources in various like health and medical systems, and pretty much like every facet of life. And so I think we really began our project kind of thinking about the different types of skills and judgment that goes into interviewing someone, and also like just what we were looking for out of these interviews, which was not only to learn more about, you know, kind of the basic facts and events of their lives, but also just understand a little bit more about them and their impacts and contributions to the various movements and organizations that they were a part of. And so from there, kind of at the beginning of this spring semester, we each were kind of assigned an elder and began to do research on them, kind of leading up to these interviews, learning as much as we could about their lives, watching interviews, reading articles, and also, you know, trying to learn the necessary context around the organizations they were in or movements that they were a part of, to really try and get the fullest possible picture of them, just short of speaking with them. And so from there, we were able to craft kind of various areas of interest and questions for our interviews. And in that process, we were able to kind of write a few sentences that we labeled as our North Star, and that kind of served as a central like theme, idea, or you know, motivation that we were able to gather from our research into this elder's life. And you know, because they have lived such long and full lives, we wanted to make sure we were not just kind of meandering through the various events of their life, but you know, making sure as we interview them, we're trying to have an insightful and purposeful conversation. And really, I think having a guiding idea really helped us to center our questions and thoughts before the interview. Personally, I was assigned the elder Rodney Barnett, who has done a variety of different things. It has had a very exciting life, and so my North Star was more focused just on thinking about how and sort of what it meant to him to be involved in these movements and initiatives and things that he created just on such a hyper local and community level. So that was kind of my North Star and my guiding theme throughout all the questions that I wrote leading up to interviewing him. And Professor Taylor also mentioned a little bit of the kind of technical aspect of this process as well, but the lovely graduate student who has been helping us, Corey, was able to kind of teach us how to use like a proper mic and headphones, and also the in conjunction with the kind of recording and editing software Audition. And I think personally, like I really love audio and like podcasts and archival things in general, so that has been really interesting and helpful to me personally, and I think all of us. But I think it's been really helpful to learn those skills because audio can be such a powerful medium. Obviously, in terms of like oral history, it's extremely important, but I think it can be such a good way to share information and experiences, and I think it's made me really excited that the lives of these elders will be available, or for others to listen to and to hear. And I think that also kind of points to the growing importance of oral history, and it's really interesting because it's both a kind of old and new tradition. Historically speaking, it kind of has been what it sounds like. Oral traditions kind of passed down in families or communities, or sometimes on a larger scale. And while that obviously has been extremely important in various traditions, it hasn't been as helpful for sort of consistent documentation or dissemination of these experiences or information on a large scale. And so obviously today we have a little bit more of a different understanding of oral history with obviously in the past few decades, with more technology from tape recorders to now the more kind of high tech equipment that we are using. The ability to actually record these interviews and be able to archive them and have them all together is, I think, not only a special experience I think for us as students and interviewers, but also because we're able to compile all of these memories and insights and histories of people and organizations to not only think about how they impact us today, but also, obviously allowing us to preserve this information for future generations. And so I think that, for that reason, this project has been really insightful for us, but also I think made me really hopeful just to think about other activists and students and researchers being able to hopefully use these interviews in the future to continue to draw those connections between what's happened in the past and the present and the future. And yeah, that's, I think, made me really excited to continue to see the project through.
And so Mariah? Shad, are you okay, or do you want her to move here? You're good, okay.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Mariah. So I was assigned with Dr. Vicki Alexander, and so she's actually a doctor in OBGYN, but what's interesting about her is she kind of frames herself as an activist. So within the work that she doesn't really talk about being a doctor a lot, but when I did speak to her on the phone, just trying to schedule an interview with her and things like that, it was really interesting how she kind of viewed herself and the work that she's done. So just a brief history. So she was a maternal health director and health officer for the city of Berkeley until she retired in 2006. And she participated in many different organizations that were kind of centered towards women's health. So I know she did a lot of work with Planned Parenthood, and then also the Rainbow Coalition and Center for Constitutional Rights and Reproductive Rights National Network. So throughout her career, it's really so hard to kind of pinpoint a few things that she did, because she's done so many things related to the Black maternal health crisis. And so when I talked to her and because I haven't interviewed her yet, but when I was doing research about her, I was just kind of trying to think about the things that she's done, what time she was doing things, and contextualize that within the timeline of her life, because she did graduate from med school, I want to say in the 60s. And so she was talking a lot, like in other interviews I had viewed, like in doing my research and thinking about her. She talked a lot about how like she didn't get into like med school originally until like affirmative action came along, and then she got into like every school she applied to. So that was really, really interesting to me in like formulating my questions and thinking about the things that I wanted to ask her. And it was also really interesting when I was talking to her how she frames herself as specifically an activist, because yes, she is a doctor and she has like that respected title, but she sees like activism as like in the heart and the core of her career. So I think it's really important how she like uses her career to kind of help fight for her community. And she also talked about like how like she was fighting with like the AIDS epidemic when it was first happening, and how she was saying like nobody wanted to touch these people, and how it was a very like taboo thing, and how it was like very like, I guess it was very like groundbreaking almost, and it was also just like it made her career like impactful in a way, because she's seen like so many things happen like throughout history related to like the Black health crisis, specifically like Black maternal mortality rates. And so it was really interesting just to like think about like all the things that she's done in her career, especially because she is an elder, so like all the generations that she's been through, all the different like things that she's seen happen throughout her career. And so I identified my North Star quote as a quote she said in like one of her other interviews that I wanted to focus my interview questions on. So she said, "This was the time of the Panthers. There were movements all over the place, and I couldn't do all of that, although I wanted to. But I had to study, and I had to do my residency. In the process of doing my residency, it became clear to me that the statistics around birthing for Black people. Then I became real angry. I became the spokesperson for something called the Coalition to Fight Infant Mortality." And so when I saw that quote, it really, I guess, it gave me insight on what she wanted to do in her career, and kind of like the turning point in which she learned about like the Black maternal mortality crisis, and how she kind of pivoted her career specifically towards activism, because she talks a lot about how like her parents were activists, her parents were like revolutionary in a sense, but it really like gives a glimpse into why she specifically wanted to do this. And then so she, in another interview that she did for the 2017 Wheeler Medalist Award, she kind of talks about like the mobile medical clinic that she helped establish in New York to give prenatal care to houseless pregnant women, which I thought was really, really important. And then she also talks about how she actually came to the Bay Area, because there was a position, I forget exactly what the name of the position was, but I think it was like the director for infant mortality or something of that sort, through the city of Berkeley. And she said that was really important to her, because at the time Berkeley had the highest level of black female maternal mortality rates. So she was saying it was really, really important to her specifically to have the job in Berkeley, because she saw that like that wasn't something that she was going to let happen in a position that she was in. And so she continued her career of activism through like Healthy Black Families. She established an organization in Oakland, and it's still around today, which is really, really impactful. So I think that that's something that's great. They focus like more, I think, on Black family health, but I think it's great how like her one interest for like maternal mortality rate kind of like spread out to like other facets of Black life. So I think that was really important. And so even though I haven't interviewed her yet, I would love to share some of like the interview questions that I do have for her. So one of them would be, your parents were a part of the civil rights movement and members of the Communist Party. How did that impact how you saw the world at a young age? What did you dream of doing when you got older? And then also, you mentioned in a previous interview that you originally got turned down from med schools, but after affirmative action was introduced in the United States higher education system, you got accepted into every school you applied to. What did you make of that moment, and what lessons did you take away from it? And then, how do you hope that your experience as a Black woman at UC San Francisco Med School would be like? How was it different from what happened? And then, when you finished med school in the 60s, the Black Panther Party was just beginning to establish its legacy. How did you find out about them? And then, how did being a mother affect your passion for health advocacy? Because not only is she an activist, not only is she a doctor, but she's also a mother. And so I felt like that was something that's really like, something that's like really near and dear to her identity, and I feel like that's something that probably impacted her work. So I would really like to talk to her and see what her insight was, and her, and just kind of like how like her whole identity as a Black woman, as a mother, as a doctor, how that all kind of like played in with each other to really like help her career in activism. So yeah, that's Dr. Vicki Alexander.
Do you want to go, or should I? If you need a second, because we need to put it. Okay.
I'm sorry for being late. Our next speaker is Bella.
Okay, thank you, UT, again. I apologize. Dead week isn't us for me. Anyways, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak. And I also just want to send my gratitude to Dr. Taylor, as well as Corey. I know he's not here, but just for the support and guidance through the project, as well as the Abolition Democracy Initiative and just the entirety of the Black Studies Collaboratory. But before I get into talking about my elder, I did want to just introduce myself a little bit more. As UT said, I'm Bella, and I'm a second year in the undergrad in the African American Studies department. And over the past couple of years, I've really found myself gravitating towards community organizing and activism, as I had done in my past in Humboldt County at home. And throughout my childhood and my high school career, I really found myself researching the Black Panther Party, as well as other Black revolutionaries. However, this research wasn't really sought out or inspired or advanced by my teachers and educators around me in that space. And so this exploration of the Panthers and other revolutionaries really connected me to the legacy of Black activism and allowed me to stay rooted in the Black liberation struggle, while the community I was around wasn't really resonating with that or passionate about the things that I was passionate about. So to have the opportunity to engage in a project like this has really fulfilled my inner child in ways that I can't explain with words. I just feel very whole, and I just feel very grateful and grounded in the work that we're doing. And I really feel it is a part of my purpose at Cal to do this research, as well as research just Black folks in general in other capacities, let that be with BSC or with Black Lives at Cal. And I really never realized how much I loved research until coming into all these different spaces. So it's just been an amazing opportunity to do this, and this is really just the beginning of my intellectual journey and my pursuit of academia in general. So anyways, let me get back on track with talking about my elder. I just wanted to connect myself to the work. But during this research, I've learned a lot of different techniques in regards to interviewing and journalism in general, which I haven't really done in the past with my other research projects. And I think one of the most important aspects of this has been identifying a North Star. And a North Star in journalistic research is the guiding point that you structure your interview and your research around. So without discovering this North Star, I wouldn't have been able to identify the moments that I found most valuable in regards to my elder. And especially because these elders have so much accomplishments and so many accolades that it's really hard to pinpoint one specific time. So as I began my research on Miss J. Tarika Lewis, I found a quote that really drew my attention from the jump, which was, "I put down my violin and picked up a gun." And I truly feel this is a pivotal moment in my elder's life, and this would become my North Star and provide the foundation I needed for a powerful interview, which I've yet to conduct. But throughout this little panel section, I will be discussing my background research, as well as sharing a couple of the interview questions I intend to ask. So as for the background of Miss J. Tarika Lewis, she was born and raised in Oakland, California during the 1950s. Growing up, she was a super talented jazz violinist, as well as an artist. She attended Oakland Tech, where she began her activist career, really inspired by the community that she built and was drawn to at Merritt College. So at Oakland Tech, she formed the BSU, as well as the Black History Club. And with this, she advocated for a Black Studies course at the high school. And in the spring of 1967, she actually dropped out of high school to join the Black Panther Party. She would become the first woman to join the party, and with this endeavor, she really had to advocate and demand for her right to be in that position, which I found super pivotal. And on top of that, she demanded to have a gun from the jump, and I think that really shows kind of her character and who she is as a woman and an activist and also a party member, and this is also the moment of my North Star, right, where she puts down the violin and picks up that gun. And this is probably one of the most powerful moments that I believe in the Black Panther Party in total, because this truly opened the door for women to not only become members, but leaders within the party. And during her time with the party, she worked her way up to a lieutenant, where she would train recruits to actually shoot the guns, which I think as a woman, you're probably also training men, and that is just that's really remarkable. As well as implementing her creativity within her visual and graphic art. So alongside Emery Douglas, Matilaba, is that? Matilaba, which was her like artist name. She was actually featured in the Black Panther newspaper over 40 times between 1967 and 1969. And her art often depicted Black female Panthers. And this really provided the space for Black women to be identified with their contributions to the community, the culture, the movement, and the party in general. And much of her work was outlined by like her shading and her thin pen stroke. So it's very easy to identify like her work as opposed to Emery's. And there was also just the common thing of representation of like police's pigs and also just like the Panthers with guns, but specifically Black women with guns. And in 1969, Miss J. Tarika Lewis actually leaves the party to pursue her music career again. So she founds the Oakland Black String Ensemble, and she even went on an international tour with the saxophonist John Handy. And after her time in the Black Panther Party, she accomplishes so much, I think like more so than even when she was in the party. She co-authored Panther, a pictorial history of Black Panthers and story behind the film alongside Eula Taylor and Mario Van Peebles, as well as starring as an actress and a consultant in the film itself in 1995. She also helps to establish Little Bobby Hutton Day in 1998. And in 2005, she co-founds the Bay Area Youth Arts alongside William Kinsey. And amongst all of her accomplishments, she also received several awards, such as the Congressional Recognition Award for Performing Artists and Recognition of Community Work by the Congresswoman Barbara Lee in 2001. And she was inducted into the Alameda County's Women's Hall of Fame, which I found super fascinating. And currently, Miss Lewis is a mother of two, and she continues to be an educator, a mentor, specifically around music. So she works as a mentor and a teacher in the string of soul violin class at the Bay Area Youth Arts, which this opportunity provides like inner city youth a rare opportunity to study classical music and receive formal trainings in musical theory as well. And she also is an instructor and counselor at the Healthy Babies Project, which is an Oakland rehab center, which she developed a framework to support recovering women to implement art as a form of healing through visualization, exploration, and understanding of past addictions and traumas. Throughout all of the community organizing and activism, I truly believe Miss Lewis stayed true to her musical foundations as well as her artistic abilities. And I really love how full circle her life in the Black Panther Party was, from putting down that violin and picking up the gun to doing the opposite, putting down the gun and picking up the violin. And throughout all of this, she was able to serve her community through her creative and artistic roots, as well as develop spaces around healing through art and music. And as I mentioned before, I did want to share some of the questions that I intend to ask Miss J. Tarika Lewis, just because I feel like that provides a little insight into the conversation I will be having with her. As an Oakland native, they grew up right across the bay from the legendary Fillmore district. So I wanted to ask, what music do they remember growing up hearing? Because I feel like that's really going to set the foundation to, what inspired them to pick up that violin in the first place. And then the second question I want to ask, because they are the first member of the Black Panther Party, I was really drawn to the fact that they had to advocate for the opportunity to be in the party. And it really seems like they don't really put up with, a lot of the BS of the party, because what woman is being like, y'all need to have me in this space. But overall, how did they navigate being a woman in the party? How did they navigate being the first woman in the party, if that? And then they also participated in the Oakland Museum of California's All Power to the People Black Panthers at 50 exposition. And during this, they collected several interviews with J. Tarika Lewis, and they mentioned sacrifices that they made during the civil rights movement, specifically around her violin career and her education. And I know later on in life they did go back and receive their diploma, but I really wanted to ask, how did that feel? Because they mentioned those sacrifices, but how did it feel to go and fulfill something that you had to put aside for the movement? So those are really just a couple of questions that I plan on asking. I do also have a video. I don't know if we still want to show that.
I think we won't show it.
Okay.
But thank you for doing that.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, that is really all I wanted to share about Miss J. Tarika Lewis.
And our last presenter is Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nikki. Thank you for having me here, and I'm really excited. I feel like a lot of the pre-interview stuff was covered, so I'm not necessarily going to go into that because it was done very well. But I think that I had the privilege of talking with Linda Burnham yesterday, and I am going to play a clip, and I will let the clip speak for itself because I in no way can summarize it, but I think that that's, to me, what is so important about this project. I mean, this project is exactly why I want to pursue journalism, and especially why I'm interested in podcasting is because the information, especially when it comes to people like the activists that we're interviewing, that is their story and their words from their mouth, is incredibly limited, and it is very hard to find. Like, even in the trying to be extensive pre-interview process, you can't find a lot of their own words in summarizing what their life has been like. A lot of it is, from different sources, and I think that that's, been very intentionally taken away from a lot of these people. And I think that that's, for me, what's been really powerful is, gathering all the information, and then you go and talk to them and they're like, no, that's wrong. That's not what happened. And also in the sense that, I was at Linda Burnham's house for like 3 hours yesterday, in the sense that I came prepared with all these questions, and like the people that I'm working with have really put thought into questions. And trying to stay on track and not just talking. There was one moment where she was like, well, what are your thoughts? What's your story? And I started talking and was like, we're not here for that. But it's, and it's just intimidating to do a bunch of work and, having read about someone or even knowing someone's art and then seeing them in real life. But it's been a really amazing experience. And I think that the opportunity that a lot of these activists are open and willing to share their stories is something that I'm very grateful for. Or I guess a little bit of background is probably necessary. So Linda Burnham is awesome. She locally founded the Women of Color Resource Center that closed, but was open for about, I think, 15 years. And that was really, I think, when it comes to Bay Area activism, her largest contribution to something that is was right around the corner. And then since then has been working with the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and co-founded the Women of Color Resource Center with this woman, Miriam, who they actually met at a UN delegation in Beijing. So Linda Burnham has gone to 6 US delegations on the status of women. Beijing, South Africa, Tokyo. We got a little confused with dates and places yesterday. So then there's also post-interviewing because, a lot of years has passed since a lot of the events that we're talking about. But I think for me what's really fascinating is there's very few activists that I will probably talk to in my life that I'm so deeply involved in grassroots organizing, but also so deeply involved in the UN. And the work on both a hyper-local domestic, not even domestic, Bay Area, Berkeley, Oakland, and then also, going to talk about the status of women in Beijing, which is really interesting in the way that she's been able to navigate all those worlds, because I feel like a lot of times we see all those things as totally separate. And she had her own archive. She has a more official archive that's housed at Smith, but she actually gave me a bunch of postcards that I don't know if we have, and I'm so silly for not bringing them, but I don't know if there will be a print element to this, but it would be really cool to include it. But just kind of going through her life was really fascinating, and just the way that she views the connections between, you know, health here and militarism in like the global South. And hearing her talk, especially, I think that's also what's really valuable is like, not that her experience is done, she is still writing and she is working really hard, but you get like a certain sort of insight, especially from their status as being elders, of like seeing the way that, you know, her parents were in the Communist Party to then going to the UN, and you know, she was really able to thread in all of her work in a way that I think is really beautiful and has almost outlined our work for us. But the clip that I'm gonna play is I also didn't even need to ask all my questions because she was just going through it. And she knew exactly what the next question was. But this question, we had spoken a little bit about the UN and her time there, and this question was a little bit more about how the Women of Color Resource Center started and what inspired her to feel that, you know, this was a necessary and the next step for her after going abroad and focusing on these international issues for so long. A little bit might get cut off, and choosing a clip was a little hard, but just to give a snippet.
That we're grappling with. And
everyone can hear.
Okay. And I felt like the legacy of the Third World Women's Alliance, the Alliance Against Women's Oppression, and the Women of Color Resource Center, each of those organizations in different ways was an expression of radical politics vis-a-vis feminism, and a feminism, what is now called intersectionality, an approach to feminism, which we didn't call it that at the time for a whole complicated set of reasons, but an approach that linked anti-racism and feminism and anti-imperialism, and a focus on working class and poor women. So the question is, how do you carry that politic into a new period? And how do you carry it forward in a way that remains somewhat relevant to what people are thinking about? And in what organizational form do you do that? And so somewhere around 89 or so, Miriam and I are in conversation, and we come out of that forming the Women of Color Resource Center, which was actually right down the street, one of its first, not its very first office, but one of its first offices is right down on Oxford Street, right below the campus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think the intention of the Women of Color Resource Center was really to figure out how to kind of stabilize that politic in a new period, in a new organizational form. So, you know, we formed a 501c3, a nonprofit, for better or worse. And then you know, proceeded to do some thinking about, okay, what are the kinds of projects that would kind of express what we're trying to bring forward from this previous period. And so it's in that context that we do some work around quote unquote welfare reform in the 90s. We put together what was it? It was Welfare Radio Project, I think we called it, which was, you know, women who were receiving welfare actually being able to express their own vantage point on.
I'm just gonna stop it because I don't, there's no good place to stop it. but then it goes on for 25 more minutes. So, but I think it's really interesting. I think that also what is incredibly valuable about this project is you will read the biography of all these organizations that she is a part of, or any activist elder is a part of, but you know, the start of it is really something that you will never find, or not never, but in its current state you cannot find, and it's something that is very personal. And you know, an organization doesn't publish like why a founder necessarily started it and like their specific steps of getting there. But I think that that's what I'm interested in, and that's what really drew me to this project, is that, you know, there's a next generation of activists, and there will always be a next generation of activists, and you will always see, you know, the highlight reel of every activist and every organization that came before you, but there is no guidebook. And not to say that this is a guidebook, you know, I can't go out and step by step do everything that Linda Burnham did, but there's like these preliminary steps and thoughts that go into a lot of the work that these people do and that we don't see and that isn't published, and that is incredibly valuable to people that need to know where to begin. And I think that like the end of our conversation, I asked her, she was featured in the documentary She's Beautiful When She's Angry, and there was this one-off quote in the documentary of like, it all started with Black Sisters United, and if you Google Black Sisters United, nothing comes up about it. And I asked her, and I was like, I can't find anything on Black Sisters United, and she was like, yeah, good luck. But and she laughed at me, and she was like, we didn't put anything out there. And I was like, okay, well then talk about it with me. And essentially, I mean, what she was saying was that she attended a abortion rally in Union Square in San Francisco in the 70s when she was new to the Bay Area, and someone went on a megaphone and said, can all the Black women here meet under a tree? And they just all met under a tree, and then they decided to start a consciousness raising group, and it didn't have a political agenda. It did not have a end goal in the way that a lot of organizations do. It wasn't necessarily about liberation as much as it was about having space to talk. And then that inspired basically all of the endeavors that she took after that, and she learned a lot from that. But it's little snippets like that that you don't see anywhere without actually talking to someone, and that's something that, you know, she didn't even remember how it ended or how many times they met. And, you know, that's not documented because I guess, like, quote unquote, they didn't like do anything, but they did obviously inspire, and that is doing something, but like it's not documented in terms of activism because it's not defined as activism. But I feel like a lot of stories like that are what was really valuable about talking with her, and what, to me, as someone who wants to, you know, learn about how I could potentially like find people that want to join in any struggle and like move forward, is what I think is like a big learning lesson. And I think what separates this project from a lot of, you know, straight up like historical archives or like dating events and I don't know, just listing the way that different movements happen, because a lot of it is not directly related to the movement, but obviously deeply informs the movement. So yeah, I mean, if there's any questions about the interview, I would also like, I could definitely answer, but that's kind of a summary of the interview yesterday, and then I'm currently in the process of setting up the next interview with Phil Hutchings, which I'm really excited for. But yeah, thank you for having us.
Well, I hope you can see why I selected these young scholars who have been working really hard this semester to prepare themselves to have certain kinds of conversations. I'm really, really proud of you guys. You guys have really worked really hard and been very committed to the process. I thought it'd be nice to put closure by just, Nikki indicated who her next person is that she's going to be interviewing. Mr. Phil Hutchings, who was the last chairman of SNCC. And maybe if each of you could just say who your next person that you're going to be interviewing, that would be great. And then we can open it up for questions if there are any. So,
Yeah, so I think just as I mentioned earlier, shortly I'll be interviewing Rodney Barnett, which was my first elder, and then after that I'll be interviewing Margaret Gordon.
Yes, so on May 11th, I will be interviewing Dr. Vicki Alexander, and then shortly after that, I will also be interviewing, oh my gosh, forgive me, his name, Donald Foster.
yes. And I should say that Miss Margaret Gordon is an environmentalist here in the Bay Area, and Mr. Foster is was a student here in African American Study and was the founder of the Theme House, as well as a journalist.
Well, and I'll be interviewing Dr. Jimmy Garrett, who founded the BSU at SF State, as well as was underground Minister of Education for Black Panther Party, the second one. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I have so many questions. I have so many questions. I just, first of all, this is in the top 3 best presentations I've heard this semester, and I say that as somebody who just ran a 9-speaker series. This is phenomenal. You have done such incredible, important work, and I feel revitalized as a scholar and as a teacher, thinking about what the possibilities are of this project. So I also have to really, always, UT my president.
Yeah.
You are amazing for doing this, and just for conceptualizing it. So, okay, so I have lots of questions, but I'm gonna reduce them to 2, maybe 3.
Okay.
But the first is, you all seem to kind of touch a little bit on it, but how did the research project, how has this work helped you redefine redefine your concept of activism, of what activism means? Because it's Mela, you started to saying that you all came to this project as committed to activism, but it seems like the conversations and the research are starting to transform or in different ways. So I'd love to hear you say a little bit about that. And then I was also wanting to ask, my second question is just how did you, your research into previous interviews help you talked about how it helped you develop your North Star guiding questions, but also how you see your own kind of interview or research style transforming through that research. And then the third question, as co-chair of the Department Curriculum Committee, is could you see this project as a course, or do you think it should remain a standalone research project? Okay, so we'll leave it like that.
I think maybe I can start by touching on the first question.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of in the past few years, now I'm a senior, so I'm about to graduate, but kind of in the past few years during college, I've done some work in journalism and some kind of work in activism and just kind of working with people one-on-one. And so it's been really interesting because, I don't know, in some sort of places I've worked, I've learned traditionally that a lot of those things exist in different spheres. But I think over the past couple of years, actually doing work like writing and interviewing people, it has, become a lot more of a Venn diagram, or honestly one circle. And so I think through doing this project as well, it's I think really showed me that honestly a lot of the times the kind of different spheres of writing and journalism and activism are all tied together through the research that we've done, and I think the conversations we have had and hope to have are not only gonna just live in a vacuum. It's not we just do the interview and it's done, but I think personally, even just doing the research, we have all I think felt really inspired by what we've been able to learn about a lot of these elders. And I think taken a lot of that, and I don't know, I've taken a lot of what I've learned so far and tried, and I think we'll hope to apply it in the future as well, just in terms of not only work around journalism and activism, but a lot of this was just about how they lived their lives and the values that they had. And so I think for me it's just been really transformative thinking about the ways in looking at these elders' lives and the ways in which they were able to, you know, not only do their work and like oftentimes document it and like be involved in their communities, but hopefully like how we can kind of continue that tradition and also use that to inform the ways that we talk with people, you know, whether that's in a formal setting, like, you know, interviewing someone, or, you know, just kind of every day, or in the, you know, kind of various work that we do. So I think for me that's like a little bit about what it's meant.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, I think like when doing this project, I think a lot of times when we think about activists, we just think about them as activists on their own. But I think for me, like researching like Dr. Vicki Alexander and seeing how she is a doctor and how she's used her career as a doctor to empower her to be an activist is really inspirational, and thinking about how people from different career pathways can utilize their career as a platform to advocate for the Black community. And so I felt that was like really inspirational, and I guess got me to think about like activism and I guess in like a different light. Because obviously we know doctors can be activists and things like that, but actually looking into her life and seeing like how she was able to like use the role she had and the positions that she had to kind of empower her community, it was really, really inspirational. And you know, I also just think that, you know, again, it gives you insight into their lives. And as far as like doing research, I think it's really helped me like become a better researcher, right? Like learning more about these people's lives. And especially just like having to scour the internet for like any like possible like little detail or information, or seeing like, oh, what organization did she found? What's the mission statement of her organization? How does this link to her career? And so thinking about like all the things that she's done or things that she's been involved in, and how it kind of like links into all the other things that she's done. And so like for me, it was really like, I guess, it taught me a lot on like how to create a timeline of somebody's life without necessarily speaking to them. And so I was kind of able to like formulate a timeline of her life and things that she did, and then also contextualizing it within what was happening at that time. And I think that that's so important, right? To say, okay, she was doing this in the 60s, but the Black Panther Party was also founded in the 60s. So how did that impact her activism, and how did that impact the way that she advocated for her community? And so thinking about like things like that was really inspirational. And then just like being able to like talk to her and like see like somebody who has been through all of like these like pivotal moments of history, things that I was never even alive for, you know, because I was born in 2002. Being able to like talk to somebody who was involved in like activism at this time, because you know, I can watch documentaries, I can watch clips, right? But actually being able to like get that oral history from her and also from her perspective is really inspirational. And I think that this could be a course. I think it would be helpful to like, because I took research methods for African American studies, but something maybe that could be integrated within that course, and actually like researching a specific person and seeing what they did in their lives. I think it's really, really important to be able to like, to research those who came before us, especially for people who are interested in African American studies and in activism. I think it's really, really important, you know, to do your own research regardless of what you read. You know, you may have an assigned reading for your class, so you read a little bit about this person, but actually like having to go out of your way to like research about this person. I know for Dr. Taylor's class, we had a paper assignment where we had to like actually like research a Black female activist, and so I did Fannie Lou Hamer, and I think that this project helped me a lot with conducting my research for Miss Hamer. And so I think that, you know, like doing research on people individually and like looking through the archives and seeing like what you could find, and kind of like piecing together like all the pieces of information is a really, really, really valuable, I think, experience for not only us on this team, but also just for any students interested in like activism or journalism, history, or anything of that sort.
That's great, thank you.
Since I know we're gonna have limited.
Yes,
time,
sorry, I'm sorry,
Can I just ask a
apologize.
question that each of you could answer as you're answering these? I'm just curious, because I only know Bella through the Veve Clark Institute. I'm just curious what your majors are, as also like that kind of question of how this project resonates to you and why, but if you don't mind sharing that.
Yeah. So I'm a double major in African American studies and legal studies, and so far in the distance, I hope to be a civil rights attorney. And so I really want to I really am really interested in activism. I'm really interested in community work, and then also I'm really inspired by Dr. Taylor. So when she had sent out the opportunity, I found like it was a great opportunity for me to get more involved within African American studies, but also more involved in just researching people who came before me, and more involved in like the history of activism, because it's important to do it's important to partake in activism in present day, but it's also important to like acknowledge those who came before you. Yeah, so acknowledging those who came before you and thinking about like the ways that they impact the activism that you can do today, and also the way that you can probably like leverage their experiences in your activism and like propelling you in your career. But it's also highly inspirational for me, right? And seeing like what they were able to do. So sometimes like when I'm in the trenches or I'm like I have to write this paper, I have to do this, you know, you can kind of think back on, well, they did all this in their life. So if they were able to do it, so am I. So.
I guess I'll also just quickly answer. I'm an English major and creative studies minor. So
We're gonna add FM to that? I think you can do it.
But yeah, I think very obviously a lot of that has been super helpful just like in writing. But I've actually found that like in a lot of just like literature and creative work, like honestly a lot of it I think relates to activism, and like I think people underestimate the ways in which literature influences people and influences the world and like the way we think. So I think that has been really interesting to explore. But I've also definitely found there's like some parallels with like interviewing, just in being like detail oriented and thinking about how to like craft a narrative and kind of craft you know, how you're going to speak to someone, and really thinking about the details of their life and you know, kind of how to ask those questions, because chronological order isn't always necessarily best, so just thinking about like the order of things. Yeah, so I find that those are some of the ways that I think what I've studied kind of directly relates to some of the work.
So we'll just have Nikki just.
Hi. I'm majoring in peace and conflict studies and minoring in ethnic studies and journalism, which was actually very kind of central to my discussion with Linda, because we were talking a lot about I started with peace and conflict studies, which generally has like a non-American focus, but is deeply rooted in non-American focus of like colonization, and like that's kind of what got me interested in it. And then ethnic studies, which is, you know, a lot more domestically focused, and our discussion was about how, you know, her going to the UN and like seeing the connections was really kind of parallel to what I was like trying to find in my studies, and like in the ways that, you know, like not to get into this because I could talk about it for an hour, but like we like have talked about like the intermonetary funds and like got into like a lot of the ways in which it's the same system on a lot of levels. And then I feel like I got interested in journalism because I was just felt like I was learning so much and was really working on research papers, but that obviously is not entirely accessible, and I really wanted to figure out how to reconfigure a lot of the knowledge into, you know, like an 800-word piece that is obviously not an entirety of the situation, but, you know, I could send it to my family and they would read it, because no one's reading my research paper that isn't an academic or isn't forced to read it and grade it. So, you know, I think that that's also why I think I'm interested in this project is, you know, there's obviously so much historical context, but it, you know, it has to be in a format that people respond well to without spending the last 4 years in undergrad in like ethnic studies, because like not everyone can do that. So I think that, you know, it's really important to me to make information accessible, because I think that that is kind of the only way for information to truly disseminate into what it is meant to do, outside of, you know, a research symposium that, you know, is generally people that we're all coming from the same-ish knowledge. But I think that sorry, I'm like bouncing all the questions in my head and trying to make sure I touch on at least some of them. I think that for me, it didn't necessarily, not that this necessarily changes my view of activism, but I think that really reinforced that. I think that me and probably a lot of other people feel like we're always like the first ones fighting for this. We're like, no one's ever been here before. And you know, that does keep the drive going, but I think that not necessarily like we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because obviously history and context and everything is always changing. But I think that we often forget to look back and be like, I'm not the first person that's been here. Other people have been here before. How did they do it? And also look at the things that didn't work well for them, because I think that a lot of times when we look back, we highlight the success stories, which is incredibly important. Like we need to highlight the success stories, but it, you know, talking with Linda is like, I tried that did not work because of this, and this, in a way that's really interesting, in the sense that, you know, a lot of the books that, or papers or whatever you read, it talks about like, this is what all these people were able to accomplish, but then really getting into the nitty gritty of like, how did they accomplish it? How was that like the fourth version that kind of stuck in the versions before that? And I think that, you know, for me is, the way that it redefined activism for me is that constantly reinforcing that everyone is kind of, you know, in the same boat in a sense, and that there's great value in really talking and looking back, because I think that activism inherently implies looking forward, because that's what you need to do in order for it to be effective. But I think that sometimes you get like tunnel vision in regards to like goals and results, and results is like a bad word, but like for lack of a better word, and I think that was important for that. And I think that in terms of the way that it redefined research for me is that, you know, often when we're writing, whether it's journalism or academic, it's like you're trying to fill in everything that you know and put out all the information that you know. But this project was very much focused on the unknown in a way that I think really changed the way that I research. Is like, so you read a thing or like looking into Linda's life, and it's not about like what I gathered from it, it's everything that this piece was missing. And then I'm trying to fill it in the missing in a way that, you know, that's not how you're, like, I can't submit a research paper that's like, this is everything I don't know. Like, no, like, I guess it makes me, like, not credible. But I think that that's what is interesting for changing the way that I view this project specifically, is keeping track of everything that I don't know and want to know, instead of focusing on what is known. Which I do think that is what would make this interesting in terms of a course, because obviously no history will ever be complete. But I think that like kind of what Mariah was talking about in terms of like finding a project is like really outlining what's out there and what's not from the get-go, I think is a really interesting way to approach research.
Well, we're gonna have to put closure because one of our panelists has to leave, but please show some love for the panelists.